Luke Duncan, Chicago's most feared kingpin, entered Le Toile d'Or, and the entire room held its breath. Everyone watched the man who owned the streets. But his date made a fatal mistake. She mocked the waitress. Gesturing dismissively at the wine list, she laughed. "She can't even read the menu, Luke. It's embarrassing." She didn't know this waitress was fluent in 7 languages and held the key to destroying his enemies. When Freya finally spoke, she didn't just read the menu. She spoke in flawless, aristocratic French that silenced the devil himself. This is the shocking story of how a single sentence in a dead dialect changed the underworld forever. If you're listening right now, I need you to understand something. Stories like Freya's, stories of women who speak dead languages and hold the power to destroy empires, these aren't the tales that get told. My analytics show that 87% of you listening aren't subscribed. But if you want to witness how a waitress brings Chicago's most feared kingpin to his knees with nothing but words, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next will prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't guns or money, they're the secrets hidden in plain sight. Now, let's begin. The rain in Chicago didn't cleanse the city. It just made the blood run faster into the gutters. Inside Le Toile d'Or, however, the storm was irrelevant. The air here was thick with aged wine, seared wagyu, and the kind of tension that came with serving people who could end lives with a phone call. Freya Gibbs adjusted the dessert fork on table 7, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. It wasn't nerves, it was exhaustion. She hadn't had a proper meal in 3 days, surviving on the kitchen scraps the line cooks left in the alley after closing. The stale croissants. The congealed sauce no one wanted. To the patrons of Le Toile, Freya was invisible. A shadow in a crisp uniform. A ghost who refilled water glasses and never made eye contact. "Check your posture, Miss Gibbs." Maitre d' Vincent Laurent glided past, his voice silk over steel. Table 7 is reserved. The Duncan party. The name sucked the warmth from the room. Freya went still. Everyone in Chicago knew the Duncans. They didn't just run the rackets or control the ports anymore. They owned the city's skeleton. Luke Duncan, the family's youngest don and most calculating strategist, was a man whose silence carried more weight than a loaded gun. He was known for 3 things: his ruthless efficiency, his taste for excellence, and the fact that he never, ever forgot a slight. "I'm ready, Monsieur Laurent," Freya whispered, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She kept her gaze down. That was survival rule number 1. Look down, stay breathing. At 8 p.m. precisely, the brass-trimmed doors swung open. The restaurant, usually a carefully orchestrated symphony of murmured deals and crystal against china, fell into absolute silence. It was as though someone had pressed pause on reality itself. Luke Duncan entered first. He was broader than the tabloid photos suggested, dressed in a midnight black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. His face was all brutal angles, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from marble, and eyes the color of winter storms. Cold. Calculating. Completely unreadable. Behind him moved 2 enforcers, men built like armored vehicles, their presence a silent threat. And clinging to his arm was a woman. The apartment Freya returned to each night wasn't really an apartment. It was a converted storage closet on the 5th floor of a building that should have been condemned a decade ago. No elevator. No heat that actually worked. Just 4 walls, a mattress on the floor, and a window that rattled so violently in the wind she sometimes woke up thinking someone was breaking in. Tonight, like most nights, she'd walked the 43 blocks home because she couldn't afford the bus fare. The holes in her shoes had expanded into gaping wounds, letting in every puddle, every piece of broken glass Chicago's streets had to offer. Her feet were numb by the time she climbed the stairs, gripping the railing because the treads were slick with something she didn't want to identify. Inside, her breath formed clouds in the frigid air. The radiator had given up entirely last week. The landlord hadn't returned her calls. Not that it mattered. She was 2 months behind on rent anyway, surviving only because Mr. Kozlowski seemed to forget she existed most of the time. Freya peeled off her soaked shoes and examined the damage. The left sole had separated completely from the upper. She'd have to glue it again. Make it last another week, another month, however long she could stretch it. On the milk crate that served as her nightstand sat a framed photograph, the only thing of value she'd kept. Her father, Professor Jonathan Gibbs, standing in front of the Sorbonne, his smile brilliant and proud. Before the accusations. Before the scandal that the press had devoured like starving wolves. Before he died in that prison cell, his name shredded, his life's work branded as fraud, embezzlement, academic misconduct, ties to international criminals. All lies. Freya knew it in her bones. But knowing didn't matter when the world had already decided you were guilty by association. She was 24 years old, spoke 7 languages fluently, and could have been teaching at any university in the country. Instead, she served wine to people who wouldn't piss on her if she were on fire, hiding behind a fake surname and a pair of clear lens glasses that made her look forgettable. Because forgettable meant safe. Forgettable meant the people who'd destroyed her father wouldn't find his daughter and finish what they'd started. Freya pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes, trying not to think about the way Luke Duncan had looked at her tonight. Like he'd seen straight through her disguise. The kitchen was already dark when Freya heard the knock. Not the front entrance, that had been locked for over an hour. This came from the service door, the one that opened into the alley where the dumpsters leaked and rats held territory disputes. She froze, her hands still wrist-deep in soapy water. The night crew had left 20 minutes ago. Vincent had departed in his usual cloud of expensive cologne. She was alone, finishing the crystal stemware because she needed the extra $7. The knock came again. Harder this time. More insistent. Freya dried her hands slowly, her heart climbing into her throat. She considered not answering. Considered slipping out through the dining room and disappearing into the Chicago night. But then a voice cut through the steel door, low and unmistakable. "Open it, Miss Gibbs. I know you're in there." Luke Duncan. Her hand trembled as she turned the deadbolt. The door swung open to reveal him standing in the dim alley light, still wearing that devastating black suit, though his tie was loosened now. His 2 enforcers flanked him like gargoyles. "Monsieur Duncan, the restaurant is closed." "I'm aware." He stepped inside without invitation, forcing her backward. His eyes swept the industrial kitchen with the same calculating assessment he'd probably used on rivals before burying them in the lake. "We need to talk." "I don't understand what." "The French." He moved closer, and Freya became acutely aware of how small the space between them had become. "That wasn't Parisian French you spoke tonight. That wasn't even modern French." Her blood turned to ice. It was langue d'oil. A dialect dead for 2 centuries outside of academic circles and very specific European bloodlines. His voice was silk wrapped around a blade. "So I'll ask you once, and I suggest you don't lie to me. Who the hell are you really?" Freya's back hit the counter. She had nowhere left to retreat. "I'm nobody," she whispered. "Just a waitress who—" "Your father was Jonathan Gibbs." The name hit her like a physical blow. She actually stumbled, gripping the counter to stay upright. Luke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those winter storm eyes. Recognition. Confirmation. "I thought so," he said quietly. "We need to talk about why someone's been watching you. And why they're connected to the people trying to kill me." Luke produced a leather portfolio from inside his jacket, setting it on the stainless steel counter between them like a chess piece. His movements were deliberate, controlled, a man who never did anything without purpose. 3 weeks ago, one of my shipments was intercepted, he said, flipping open the portfolio. Not by the feds. Not by a rival family. By ghosts. Freya's eyes dropped to the document inside. Even from a distance, she recognized the handwriting, elegant, antiquated, the kind of script that belonged in museum archives, not criminal enterprises. They left this behind. A calling card. Luke's jaw tightened. I've had it analyzed by every translator in my network. French professors, linguists, even a curator from the Art Institute. No one can make sense of it. He slid the document toward her. Freya's hands moved before her brain could stop them, drawn by a force she couldn't name. The paper was expensive, heavy stock. The ink was real ink, not printed. And the words. Her breath caught. This isn't just old French, she whispered, her fingers tracing the lines without touching the paper. This is encrypted Occitan mixed with commercial code from the Lion Silk Trade Guilds. 17th century. Luke went very still. Can you read it? It's a manifesto. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears as the patterns unlocked in her mind, years of her father's training rising like muscle memory. They're announcing their arrival. Not just in Chicago, they're claiming ancestral rights to North American territory based on old French colonial contracts. That's insane. That's the Chevalier's d'Argent. Freya looked up, and the recognition in her eyes made Luke's expression sharpen. The Silver Knights. A syndicate that's been operating in shadows since before the French Revolution. My father spent 15 years researching them. He said they were the reason. She stopped herself, but it was too late. The reason he was killed, Luke finished quietly. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Freya's hands were shaking now, trembling against the counter. They're here for something specific, she continued, forcing herself to focus on the document rather than the memories clawing at her throat. These coordinates, they're not addresses. They're deeds. Property claims. They're planning to take Chicago piece by piece, and they're using legal frameworks no one even remembers exist. Luke's phone was already in his hand. How long do we have? According to this? Freya met his gaze. They've already started. Vincent Laurent's office smelled like leather and old cigars. Freya stood in the doorway, still wearing her uniform from the previous night's shift, watching Luke Duncan write a check with the casual indifference of a man buying groceries. This is highly irregular, Monsieur Duncan, Vincent said, his usual composure cracking at the edges. Miss Gibbs is one of our most reliable. I'm buying out her contract. Not asking permission. Luke signed his name with a flourish that somehow looked threatening. Consider this severance for the next 5 years of her labor. The check hit the desk. Freya couldn't see the amount from where she stood, but she saw Vincent's face go pale. Of course, monsieur. Whatever you require. 20 minutes later, Freya sat in the back of a car that cost more than her entire building, watching the city blur past tinted windows. One of Luke's enforcers drove. The other sat in the passenger seat, silent as a tombstone. Luke occupied the space beside her, working through emails on his phone as though he hadn't just purchased a human being. I didn't agree to this, Freya said quietly. No. Luke didn't look up. But you also didn't say no when I asked if you wanted to find the people who killed your father. Her throat tightened. She had no response to that. The estate was in Lake Forest, hidden behind gates that probably had better security than Fort Knox. The house itself was a sprawling modern masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the water. It was the kind of place that appeared in architecture magazines with captions like, "Contemporary elegance meets old-world power." Inside, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and a knowing smile introduced herself as Mrs. Chin, the house manager. "Your suite is on the 3rd floor, east wing," she said, leading Freya up a floating staircase. "Mr. Duncan has requested you be comfortable. Anything you need, you ask me. Anything you see, you forget." The suite was larger than Freya's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A bed that looked like a cloud. A bathroom with marble everything. On the desk sat a stack of documents, each one stamped with seals Freya recognized from her father's research. Beside them, a note in Luke's sharp handwriting. "Tomorrow, 6 a.m. War room. Bring everything your father taught you." Welcome to the game, Miss Gibbs. Freya sank onto the edge of the bed, her reflection staring back at her from the dark windows. The invisible woman was gone. Something far more dangerous had taken her place. The war room was nothing like Freya had imagined. No smoke-filled backroom with maps pinned to walls. Instead, it was a glass-encased office overlooking the lake, equipped with technology that belonged in a Fortune 500 boardroom. Luke stood at the head of a long table, 3 of his senior lieutenants flanking him, all of them staring at her like she was a particularly interesting science experiment. "Gentlemen, meet our new strategic consultant," Luke said, his tone allowing no argument. "Miss Gibbs will be leading the Chevaliers Initiative." One of the men, thick-necked, scarred, the kind who solved problems with his fists, snorted. "The Waitress?" "Boss, with all due respect." "She decoded a 300-year-old land claim in under 5 minutes, Luke interrupted, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet. "How many languages do you speak, Marcus?" Marcus's jaw worked. "English." "Then sit down and listen." For the next 3 hours, Freya dissected every document Luke had accumulated on the Chevaliers. She explained how their legal framework functioned, how they were exploiting gaps in treaty law that no modern attorney would even know existed. The men's skepticism gradually transformed into something resembling respect. When the meeting ended and the lieutenants filed out, Luke remained, pouring 2 glasses of scotch that probably cost more than Freya used to make in a month. "You kept your eyes down the entire presentation," he observed, sliding a glass toward her. "Old habit. Bad habit." He leaned against the table, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "You're not serving wine anymore, Freya. You're sitting at the table. The moment you accept that, you become dangerous. I'm a translator, not. You're a weapon." He said it simply as fact. "The question is whether you're going to keep pretending to be a butter knife when you're actually a sword." Freya took a sip of the scotch, letting it burn down her throat. "And what happens when swords get too sharp? When they become threats?" Something almost like amusement crossed Luke's face. "Then they become partners." "I don't think you do partners, Monsieur Duncan." "I didn't." He held her gaze. "Until I met someone who could do something I couldn't." "You want to know the difference between surviving and winning, Freya? Survivors hide their power. Winners weaponize it." Outside the windows, Chicago glittered like broken glass in the darkness. Freya set down her glass. "If I do this, if I help you destroy them, I want answers. About my father. About what really happened. Deal." Luke extended his hand. When Freya shook it, she felt the shift. The invisible woman was truly gone now. The queen was learning to move her pieces. The gown was a weapon disguised as fashion. Midnight blue silk that hugged every curve Freya had spent years hiding beneath shapeless uniforms, with a neckline that demanded confidence she wasn't sure she possessed. Mrs. Chin had insisted on the diamond earrings borrowed from Luke's vault, each one worth more than Freya's childhood home. "You look terrified," Luke said from the doorway of her suite, already dressed in his tuxedo, looking like he'd been born to wear it. "I am terrified." Freya's hands shook as she fastened the second earring. "The Aquitaine Foundation Gala isn't just high society. It's where I used to go with my father before they destroyed him." Luke crossed the room, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. "Which is exactly why you're the only one who can do this. You know these people. You speak their language. Literally." The ballroom of the Drake Hotel glittered with old money and older secrets. Freya entered on Luke's arm, feeling every eye turn toward them. The notorious kingpin and his mysterious companion. She could already hear the whispers starting, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "There," Luke murmured, his hand steady at the small of her back. "Near the champagne fountain." The woman in red. Freya's breath caught. Isabelle Archambault. French aristocracy, board member of 3 international corporations, and, according to Luke's intelligence, the Chevalier's public face in North America. "I see her." "Then work your magic, Miss Gibbs." Freya detached from Luke's side, gliding through the crowd with a grace she'd learned in another lifetime. She positioned herself near Isabel's circle, close enough to overhear, invisible once again, but by choice this time. The conversation was in rapid Parisian French, discussing art acquisitions and charity work. Then Isabel's companion switched dialects, sliding into the same archaic Occitan from the documents. The property transfers are complete. 3 more deeds this week. Duncan has no idea where purchasing his empire out from under him through legal channels he doesn't even know exist. Freya's pulse hammered, but her expression remained serene. She sipped her champagne, memorizing every word. Freya Gibbs. The voice froze her blood. She turned to find Catherine Whitmore, one of the socialites from L'Etoile d'Or. The woman who'd laughed about her not being able to read the menu. I almost didn't recognize you, Catherine said, her smile sharp with malice. Playing dress-up tonight? How ambitious. Freya met her gaze, no longer looking down, no longer invisible. Bonsoir, Catherine, she said in flawless Parisian French. Still struggling with the wine list, I see. That Bordeaux you're drinking is from 2019. Terrible vintage. But then, you always did have such common taste. Catherine's face went white. Freya smiled and walked away, every eye in the room following her now. The sword had just drawn first blood. Did you feel that shift? Freya just went from invisible to unstoppable. From serving wine to serving revenge ice cold. If you're feeling the power of her transformation, you need to know that this story is about to take a darker turn. The romance between her and Luke? That was just the appetizer. What comes next is the main course, and it's served with a side of betrayal. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next 10 minutes will show you why the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one with the gun. It's the one who knows your secrets. Freya realized something was wrong the moment she stepped into the parking garage. The gala had run late, past midnight. Luke had sent her ahead with one of his drivers while he finished a conversation with a Chicago alderman whose palms needed greasing. The concrete structure echoed with her heels, each click too loud in the emptiness. The car was waiting exactly where it should be. Black sedan. Tinted windows. But the driver standing beside it wasn't Marcus. Miss Gibbs, the man said, his accent unmistakably French. A word, if you please. She turned to run, but 2 more men materialized from behind the concrete pillars. They moved with military precision, cutting off every exit before she'd taken 3 steps. We mean you no harm, the first man continued, though the gun now visible beneath his jacket suggested otherwise. We simply wish to have a conversation about your father's research. I don't know what you're talking about. Freya's voice came out steadier than she felt. Professor Gibbs was very close to exposing our organization before his unfortunate incarceration. The man smiled, and it was the smile of a shark. We've spent years wondering what happened to his notes, his journals, his precious daughter who inherited his gift for languages. And then you appeared on Luke Duncan's arm, speaking dialects that shouldn't exist outside our bloodlines. A woman's voice now, sharp and cultured. Isabel Archambault stepped from the shadows, still wearing her red gown from the gala. Did you really think we wouldn't recognize Jonathan Gibbs's daughter? Freya's mind raced. They were right, she'd been careless. The moment she'd spoken at L'Etoile d'Or, she'd painted a target on her back. Luke will come for me, she said. We're counting on it. Isabel nodded to her men. Monsieur Duncan has become a problem. He controls territories we require. But he's a businessman at heart, and businessmen make deals. His empire for his precious little linguist. The men closed in. Freya felt rough hands grab her arms, smelled chloroform on the cloth moving toward her face. But in that final moment before the chemical darkness claimed her, she caught Isabel's wrist, yanking her close enough to whisper directly in her ear. In perfect Occitan, using a phrase only someone with deep knowledge of the Chevalier's hierarchy would know, Freya spoke 7 words. Isabel's eyes went wide with shock. Then everything went black. But Freya was smiling, because those 7 words weren't just an insult. They were a message Luke would understand when he found the tracking device sewn into her gown's hem. Freya woke to the smell of salt water and rust. Her head throbbed where they'd struck her, and her wrists burned from zip ties cutting into skin. The room was industrial, exposed pipes, concrete walls, the distant sound of water lapping against metal. A warehouse on the docks, she guessed. Somewhere Luke's usual network wouldn't think to look. Isabel sat across from her in a chair that looked absurdly elegant against the grimy surroundings, scrolling through her phone with manicured nails. "He'll pay," Isabel said without looking up. "Duncan values loyalty above all else. You've become his weakness. You don't know him at all." Freya tested the ties. Tight. Professional. Luke doesn't have weaknesses. He has assets. How pragmatic. Isabel finally met her gaze. "Your father said similar things before we made him disappear. He thought his research was just academic. He didn't understand that some knowledge is dangerous to possess." Rage flared hot in Freya's chest, but she forced it down, forced herself to think. The tracking device in her dress was gone. They'd stripped her down and given her canvas coveralls. Her shoes were missing, but they'd left her the small gold locket she always wore, the one they'd assumed was just cheap sentiment. Inside that locket was something far more valuable than sentiment. "I need water," Freya said, her voice hoarse. Isabel gestured to one of the guards. He brought a bottle, holding it to Freya's lips like she was a child. She drank slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. The guard's phone was clipped to his belt. Old model. The kind with physical buttons. When he turned away, Freya whispered a single phrase in Occitan. Not to him, to Isabel. "Le sang d'argent coule noir." The silver blood runs black. Isabel's head snapped up, her expression shifting from bored confidence to shock. "How do you know that phrase?" "My father's journals weren't destroyed," Freya lied smoothly, watching Isabel's face. "I know everything, including the fact that someone in your inner circle has been embezzling from the Chevaliers for a decade. The real reason you're in Chicago isn't expansion, it's because Paris wants you gone and you're running. You're bluffing." "Am I?" Freya smiled. "Check your accounts. Check Geneva. Or better yet, ask your dear cousin Philippe why the Vatican collection went missing last spring." Isabel's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. In that moment of distraction, Freya's fingers found the guard's phone. She pressed 3 buttons in sequence, a pattern that would send her location to the last number that had called it. Luke's number. The game had just changed. The warehouse burned behind them, black smoke rising into the Chicago dawn. Luke's men were efficient, no bodies would be found, no evidence would remain. The Chevaliers d'Argent had learned the hard way that you didn't take what belonged to Luke Duncan and expect to keep breathing. Freya sat in the back of the car, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the flames through the rear window. Her wrists were bandaged. Her face was bruised. But her eyes were clear. Isabel talked, Luke said quietly beside her. "Gave us every name, every account, every property deed before he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Good." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You played a dangerous game in there. That bluff about the embezzlement." "It wasn't a bluff." Freya turned to face him. "My father's last letter mentioned it. He knew the Chevaliers were fracturing from the inside. I just gambled that Isabel didn't know how much he'd figured out before they killed him." Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're not going back to that apartment." "I know. I'm not asking, Freya. I'm telling you. You stay at the estate. You work with me. You help me dismantle every piece of their operation." He paused. "And then we rebuild your father's name." Her breath caught. "Luke. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, investigators, political connections. If Jonathan Gibbs was innocent, we prove it. We make everyone who destroyed him pay." His hand found hers in the darkness between them. "But you need to stop hiding. Stop making yourself small. Stop being invisible." "And what do I become instead?" The car pulled up to L'Etoile d'Or. The restaurant was closed. dark except for a single light in the dining room. Luke stepped out and offered his hand. Inside, table 7 was set for 2. Not the cheap house wine Freya used to serve. Not the prefix menu for tourists. This was the chef's private reserve, the courses he only prepared for heads of state. On Freya's plate sat a single card, embossed in gold. Freya Gibbs, Chief Strategic Officer, Duncan Enterprises. The shy waitress died in that warehouse, Luke said, pulling out her chair. The woman sitting down tonight? She's the most dangerous person in Chicago. Freya sat. For the first time in her life, she didn't look down. She looked him straight in the eyes and smiled. Then let's order. Thank you so much for experiencing Freya's incredible journey with me. From serving scraps to sitting at the table of power, what a transformation. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of romance, revenge, and redemption. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode. And I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment? The restaurant confrontation? The warehouse rescue? Or that final power move? Comment below and let's discuss. Your engagement means everything to this channel. See you in the next story.